In 1908, Henry Ford stood on the factory floor in Highland Park, Michigan, and watched the first Model T roll off the assembly line. Within a decade, he would become one of the richest men in the world, and within 2 decades, he would build a house so extravagant, so utterly excessive, that it would take a staff of 50 people just to keep the lights on. This is the story of the automotive mansions, the palaces built by men who turned gasoline and steel into empires. Along the way, we'll see ballrooms that could hold 500 guests, secret tunnels, indoor swimming pools before most Americans had running water, and gardens that rivaled European royalty. So let's begin. But first, what was it about the automobile industry that created this particular kind of wealth, this particular kind of excess? See, the thing about the automotive boom is that it wasn't just about money. Plenty of industries created millionaires: oil, steel, railroads. But the automobile magnates were different. They were building something entirely new, not just products, but an entire way of life, and they wanted everyone to know it. The early 20th century was a strange time for American wealth. The Gilded Age was technically over, but nobody had told the rich people. The Vanderbilts and Carnegies had already established that if you had money, you built a mansion. Not a house. A mansion. Something with wings and turrets and a name. Something that announced to the world exactly how far you had climbed. But the automobile men had a problem. They were new money. Very new. The established families looked down on them as mechanics, as tinkerers, as men who got their hands dirty. Henry Ford had been a farm boy who liked machines. The Dodge brothers had worked as machinists. These weren't the sons of old money attending Harvard and summering in Newport. These were men who had built their fortunes from nothing, and the old aristocracy never let them forget it. So what do you do when society won't accept you? You build something so magnificent, so undeniably impressive, that they can't ignore you. You build a statement. You build a monument. You build a mansion. Now, I should mention, these weren't just big houses. These were architectural experiments. The automotive magnates didn't want to copy what the Vanderbilts had done. They wanted to do something new, something that reflected their industries, their innovations, their particular genius. And they had the money to make it happen. Let's start with the man who started it all. Henry Ford's Fair Lane estate in Dearborn, Michigan, was completed in 1915. The main house had 56 rooms, 56, and that doesn't count the powerhouse, which was a separate building that generated all the electricity for the estate using water power from the Rouge River. Ford, being Ford, insisted on energy independence. The man who was revolutionizing mass production wasn't about to rely on the local power company. The grounds covered over 1,000 acres. There were gardens designed by Jens Jensen, the most famous landscape architect in America. There were walking trails, a man-made lake, and thousands of trees. Ford reportedly knew every species on the property. He would walk the grounds in the morning before anyone else was awake, cataloging the birds. Here's what I find fascinating about Fair Lane. For all its size, Ford insisted he wanted something simple, comfortable. He called it a country home, which is a bit like calling Buckingham Palace a cottage. But Ford genuinely seemed to believe that his 56-room mansion with its own power plant and 1,000-acre grounds was modest. Compared to what some of his competitors would build, maybe it was. The interior was designed by Marion Mahoney Griffin, one of the only female architects working at that level in America at the time. She had worked with Frank Lloyd Wright, and you can see the Prairie School influence throughout: horizontal lines, natural materials, an attempt to integrate the house with the landscape. Ford wanted modern, but he also wanted warm. He wanted cutting-edge technology hidden behind wood paneling and stone fireplaces. And the technology was remarkable. The house had its own telephone system, its own fire suppression system, and an intercom that allowed Ford to communicate with any room in the house. There was a bowling alley in the basement, a pool house, a skating house for winter. Ford even had a private laboratory where he and his friend Thomas Edison would conduct experiments during Edison's visits. Imagine being a fly on that wall, two of the most brilliant minds of the industrial age, tinkering away in a private lab, probably arguing about everything. But Fairlane, for all its innovations, was restrained compared to what came next. The Dodge brothers, John and Horace, had made their fortune building engines and transmissions for Ford before launching their own car company in 1914. They were tough men, hard drinking, rough around the edges. The newspapers called them the roughneck millionaires. And when they started making real money, the kind of money that makes even other millionaires uncomfortable, they decided to build. Rose Terrace was John Dodge's answer to the critics who said he would never be accepted in polite society. Built in Grosse Pointe Farms, the estate was designed in the French Renaissance style. Think Versailles, but in Michigan. The main house had over 40,000 square feet of living space. The ballroom could hold hundreds of guests. The gardens were modeled after those at French Chateau, complete with fountains and classical statuary. John Dodge didn't live to see it completed. He died in 1920 during the Spanish flu pandemic. His wife, Matilda, finished the construction and lived there for decades. She would eventually marry a lumber baron named Alfred Wilson and build another massive estate, Meadow Brook Hall, which still stands today as one of the largest historic homes in America. But Rose Terrace, the original one, was demolished and rebuilt even larger by Anna Dodge, Horace's widow. The second Rose Terrace, completed in 1934, was even more extravagant than the first. Over 30,000 square feet, pink marble imported from Italy, a music room with gold leaf ceilings. Anna Dodge reportedly spent over $3 million on the construction in Depression-era money. That's roughly $60 million today. I mention this because it tells you something about the mindset. While the rest of America was struggling through the worst economic crisis in history, the automotive widows were building palaces. They had so much money that the Depression was something that happened to other people. If you've made it this far, you're probably into this kind of stuff. Quick question: where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. And hey, subscribe if you haven't. We do this every week. All right, let's talk about what might be the most audacious automotive mansion of them all. Meadow Brook Hall. Matilda Dodge Wilson, yes, the same Matilda who had finished Rose Terrace after John Dodge died, decided in the 1920s that she needed something even grander. Her second husband, Alfred Wilson, apparently agreed. Together, they commissioned a Tudor Revival mansion in Rochester, Michigan, that would rival anything built by European aristocracy. Meadow Brook Hall took 4 years to build, from 1926 to 1929. The final cost was over $4 million, again, in 1929 money. The house has 110 rooms. Let that sink in. 110 rooms. There are 39 fireplaces, 24 bathrooms, a ballroom that could accommodate 200 guests, a playhouse for Matilda's children that was basically a fully functional miniature mansion with its own kitchen. The craftsmanship is almost obscene in its attention to detail. Hand-carved woodwork throughout, Tiffany glass windows, ceilings painted by artists brought in from Europe. Every doorknob, every light fixture, every piece of hardware was custom designed. Matilda Wilson didn't believe in off-the-shelf anything. But here's the thing about Meadow Brook Hall that gets me. Despite its size, despite its opulence, it was designed to be a family home. Matilda raised her children there. They celebrated holidays in that ballroom. The kids played in that ridiculous playhouse. In the Wilsons' minds, this wasn't excess. It was simply the appropriate way for a family of their status to live. After both Wilsons died, Matilda donated the estate to Oakland University. Today, you can tour it. I highly recommend it if you're ever in Michigan. Walking through those rooms, seeing the scale of it all, gives you a visceral sense of what Gilded Age wealth really meant. Numbers don't capture it. You have to stand in that ballroom and look up at the ceiling and feel small. Now, the Ford and Dodge families weren't the only ones building. The Fishers, the brothers who founded Fisher Body Company, which made car bodies for General Motors, built an entire compound in Detroit. There were 7 brothers, and at one point, several of them had mansions within a few blocks of each other on Boston Boulevard. The neighborhood was essentially a private enclave of automotive money. Lawrence Fisher built a house that looked like an Italian villa, complete with a swimming pool, a gymnasium, and a carriage house that was bigger than most people's actual houses. His brother Charles built nearby in a similar style. The Fisher brothers were known for their parties, lavish affairs with orchestras and catering and guest lists that read like a who's who of American industry. But wealth of this magnitude creates its own problems. Maintaining these estates required armies of servants, groundskeepers, gardeners, cooks, housekeepers, chauffeurs, butlers. The staff at a major automotive mansion might number 50 or more. These weren't just houses, they were small villages. The economics only made sense as long as the automotive fortunes kept growing, and for a while they did. Through the 1920s, car sales boomed. The magnates got richer, the mansions got bigger, the parties got more elaborate. It seemed like the good times would never end. Then came 1929. The stock market crash didn't destroy the automotive fortunes overnight. The magnates were too diversified for that, too entrenched. But it changed the calculus. Suddenly, maintaining a 100-room mansion during an economic catastrophe seemed less like appropriate grandeur and more like grotesque indifference. Some families scaled back, others retreated behind their gates and hoped nobody would notice. The 1930s were a strange interlude for the automotive mansions. Some, like Anna Dodge's rebuilt Rose Terrace, were constructed during the Depression as if nothing had happened. Others fell into quiet decline. The servants were let go. The gardens grew wild. The ballrooms gathered dust. A few families lost everything and had to sell. World War II changed things again. Suddenly, building grand estates seemed not just inappropriate, but unpatriotic. Resources were needed for the war effort. Young men who might have become servants were fighting overseas. The era of the great automotive mansions was, functionally, over. What happened after the war is almost sadder than if the houses had simply burned down. Many were sold. Some were converted to other uses: museums, schools, corporate headquarters. Others were demolished outright, their land subdivided into suburban lots. The idea of a single family occupying a 100-room house seemed increasingly absurd in post-war America. We had moved on. We had different dreams now. Rose Terrace was demolished in 1976. The contents were auctioned off, and the wrecking ball came. Today, the site is occupied by, I kid you not, a smaller house. Still expensive, still Grosse Pointe wealthy, but nothing like what stood there before. Fair Lane survived, barely. After Clara Ford died in 1950, the estate passed through several hands before becoming the property of the University of Michigan Dearborn. Today, it's a National Historic Landmark, though the house itself has needed extensive restoration. The powerhouse that Ford was so proud of still stands, a monument to his obsession with self-sufficiency. Meadow Brook Hall, as I mentioned, became part of Oakland University. It's probably the best preserved of the major automotive mansions, maintained as a museum and event venue. You can get married there if you have the budget. Plenty of people do. And what of the families themselves? The Fords remained wealthy, of course. The Ford Motor Company is still one of the largest automakers in the world, and the Ford family still controls a significant stake. But they don't live like their ancestors did. Edsel Ford II doesn't have a 56-room mansion. The era of that kind of visible, overwhelming excess is gone. The Dodge name survives on cars, but not on families in the same way. John and Horace both died in 1920, within months of each other. Their widows lived long lives, Anna Dodge until 1970, Matilda until 1967, but the direct line of Automotive Dodges ended with the founders. The mansions they built outlasted them, but just barely. The Fisher brothers faded from public memory almost entirely. Their houses are gone. Their company was absorbed into General Motors decades ago. A few streets in Detroit still bear their name. That's about it. I find something melancholy in all of this. These men, and they were almost all men, though their wives often made the real decisions about the houses, believed they were building legacies. They thought the mansions would stand for generations, that their descendants would walk those halls, that the family name would be synonymous with the estate forever. Instead, most of the houses are gone, and the names are historical footnotes. But maybe that's not the right way to look at it. The automotive mansions, for all their excess, tell us something important about a particular moment in American history. They show us what happens when new money meets old insecurity. They demonstrate the lengths people will go to prove they belong, and they remind us that wealth, however vast, is always temporary. The men who built these houses genuinely believed they were creating something permanent. Henry Ford thought Fair Lane would be a home for Fords for centuries. The Dodge widows thought their palaces would stand as monuments to their husbands' genius. The Fisher brothers probably imagined their grandchildren playing in those gardens, hosting parties in those ballrooms. None of that happened. The gardens were paved over or sold off. The ballrooms became museum exhibits or wedding venues. The grandchildren, if they visited at all, came as tourists. There's a photograph I've seen of Henry Ford walking the grounds of Fair Lane near the end of his life. He's alone, an old man on a path through the woods he planted decades earlier. He looks small against the trees. The caption says he walked those paths every morning until he couldn't walk anymore. I wonder what he thought about. The cars, the factory, the house, all of it slipping away? The automotive boom created a kind of wealth America had never seen before and would rarely see again. It came fast, and it came big, and the men who made it wanted everyone to know. So they built palaces, monuments to their own success, architectural achievements that remain where they still stand, among the most impressive private homes ever constructed in America. But here's the thing about monuments. They're supposed to outlast the people they commemorate. They're supposed to stand as permanent reminders of greatness. These didn't. Most of them are gone now, demolished or burned or simply fallen apart from neglect. The ones that survive do so as museums, artifacts of a vanished world, maintained by institutions rather than families. Maybe that's the real lesson of the automotive mansions. You can build something enormous. You can fill it with the finest materials and the most skilled craftsmen. You can hire 50 servants and throw parties for 500 guests. You can make it so beautiful, so impressive, so undeniably magnificent that even the people who look down on you have to admit it's something special. And then time passes. The industry changes. The money flows elsewhere. The children don't want to maintain what their parents built. The servants are impossible to find. The roof starts leaking. The gardens grow wild. In the end, the automotive magnates didn't build legacies. They built snapshots. Frozen moments of a particular kind of American dream, the belief that enough money, spent boldly enough, could purchase immortality. It couldn't. Nothing can. And that is the story of the automotive mansions. Subscribe if you want more, and let me know in the comments. Had you heard of any of these houses before? Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.